Welcome to Wednesday Against the Stream. Jason Murphy, Dharma teacher extraordinaire. Not really, actually. I'm just struggling through like everyone else. But yeah, we're going to meditate for a bit, and I'm going to be speaking about. There was a question last week, and I kind of answered it, and then I figured, this question of not self or no self or emptiness, it's widely misunderstood, and so I think that I'm going to just try to break that down best I can uh, tonight. It's a talk that I've given before. It's one of the kind of basic tenets of Buddhism. I think it's pretty useful. So we'll take a little detour from Bhikkhu Bodh or from Buddhadasa Bhikkhu's Handbook for Mankind and delve into this question, this exploration. So let's do that. We'll start by sitting in some meditation, and then I'm just going to kind of launch right into the topic, and then we'll open up for some discussion afterwards. Hopefully a few more people will join us. Looks like everyone, I'm not sure, John, if are you new to the Sangha? Are you new to meditation? Can you let me know? Maybe he doesn't have audio accessible, so we'll just work with that. I was just going to say, been visiting the last few months. Okay, great, thanks. So you have the basic kind of meditation instructions. I'm thinking I'm going to not give a whole lot of meditation instruction today, just allow us all to kind of work with what we can work with. But let me just kind of give what's the goal, right? The goal of mindfulness meditation, concentration, is to collect the attention. And then once the attention is collected, and there's various ways to do that, following the breath, paying attention, being aware of the body, scanning through the body, being aware of just the kind of experience of breathing within the body. There is sound, the comings and goings of sound. There is using kind of repeated phrases, such as, loving kindness phrases, may I be happy, may I be peaceful, may I be free from suffering, or any variation of that through compassion, or any of the heart practices. These are kind of the three main, or I guess the four main tools for present time experience to enhance one's, maybe not even enhance, I think it's actually prepare the mind. And that can take a long time. That can happen fairly quickly. It can vary. But these are all ways to kind of collect the attention and sustain the attention on the present time experience, through which one can begin to contemplate the Dharma, which is usually why we sit and then have a Dharma talk afterwards, or to gain insight through these different tools, through these different kind of avenues of bringing attention to the body or the breath, or collecting the attention through the mind. So that's the deal, right? So yeah. So I like to use the basic three instructions of relax, observe, allow. I feel like it allows enough concentrated attention on the meditation object, whether that be breath, body, sound, or mantra. And regardless, whenever the attention wanders off, just acknowledging that that's what's happening, that has happened, and try to meet it with as much friendliness or kindness as possible. Yeah. So what I will do, I'm not sure if I did this last week or not, is I will just ring the bell kind of periodically. So we'll start with 3 bells, and then there'll be 3 bells at the end, and then periodically I'll ring the bell every 5 minutes or so to invite the mind to come back to the present time experience, or to deepen into the present time experience. So we can utilize the sound, the coming and going of sound, as a grounding tool, an invitation to come back to the present time if you've wandered off. So let's do this. So finding a posture that's workable, that's sustainable, where you can feel relaxed and alert. And just hearing the bell. It's helpful to allow the eyes to close or be downcast. Finding some way to aim the attention towards this present time experience. Relaxing into each new breath, each new moment. Observing what arises in the heart and the mind, any of the sense doors. And then allowing whatever arises to stay for a time and pass away, as all things do. And just using that as a gentle reminder. Relax, observe, allow each breath, each moment. The next time you hear the bell will be the end of the meditation. So to take a moment and, I'm going to take a moment and stretch here, but before that, maybe, or during that, take a moment and just recognize kind of what that experience was like. Maybe more silence than you're used to. Maybe it was great. Maybe you appreciated less instruction. Just notice what happened for you. I'm going to go stretch a little bit. I've been sitting quite a bit today. I'll be back in a moment. And we're back. I wanted to focus on an aspect of the Dharma that is often very confusing. So the concept is not self, or that there is no fixed and permanent self. Pretty unique to the Buddha. In what's called the three characteristics of existence, which are basically the last evening of the Buddha's pre-enlightenment, he had sat with strong determination after kind of emaciating his body and kind of doing extreme yogic practices and extreme concentration practices, and not really finding the goal or the end of suffering. He began to nourish his body more, do less yoga, and more contemplative meditative practice. And I think it's considered the 4 stages of his enlightenment. It became clear to him what then became known as the 3 characteristics. In other words, he began to see clearly suffering and the cause of suffering. He began to see clearly impermanence and the way in which impermanence and our resistance to it causes suffering. And he began to see that what we call a self or a self-view or an identity view is also a place or a form of suffering. So he began to see kind of clearly how these 3 aspects or characteristics play themselves out. And so I'm going to break down what's called anatta, which is also just known as not self, often confused as meaning no self. Even Buddhist scholars or Buddhist teachers call it no self. But the truth is that anatta means no soul. That's actually what the true translation means. And original to the Buddha, anatta is the teaching of that separated his teaching from all others. And I think something to understand is that at the time of the Buddha, and for probably up till today, really, there's been wise people. There were other sages and other philosophical kind of backgrounds, and people who had, there were kind of the Hindu God belief, the kind of Trinity belief of Shiva and Brahma and Vishnu. And that was the primary religion of India at the time. And then, there were all of these kind of demigods and all of these kind of, and, just all of this kind of philosophical stuff around that. There was astrology at the time too. There were a few different philosophical kind of beliefs around determinism, fatalism. And the Buddha really stepped out from all of those belief systems. And he did that through his own practice, through his own kind of exploration of the mind and the body and the natural world. And so, Yeah, so anatta was one of the ways in which, and he received tons of criticism because he was basically saying, like, yeah, all this kind of, you believe that your soul will be carried on to an afterlife, not true. There's no basis in that. We still don't actually have any basis in that. Yet something like 80% of the world, or 80% of the population, believes in some kind of afterlife and or greater power, greater than themselves, like a creator god of some sort. And so this, this caused a lot of controversy at the time, and for some people, it still causes controversy today. So the misunderstanding of not self is perhaps one of the biggest misunderstandings of our lives. In the beginning of practice, the I, the me, the mind, but the I is central. And most of our thoughts, feelings, plans, and intentions, hopes, and dreams are all centered around this idea. Even just the idea of I want less suffering. So in one way, nothing can seem more kind of self-evident than the I. We're taught of this kind of I, or possession of this body, or this idea of self from childhood. So we'll call it a master idea. What is a master idea? A master idea, the way that I understand it, from both from philosophy of mind and just other explorations in race, class, gender, things like that. A master idea is when there is something that is talked about to such a degree that it becomes belief. It becomes a general understanding. One example of a master idea that I think is pretty interesting is the sky is blue. Now, most of us have the perception that the sky is blue. That when we say, oh, there's a blue sky out. But in reality, that's not the case. In reality, the sky is not blue. And yet we all have this common belief that the sky is blue. In the same way, we believe in an I. The sky is actually the sun reflecting off the ocean, which is a major part of this planet. And that sun reflection hits the ozone, or the atmosphere, and creates this illusion of a blue sky. Now, that doesn't mean that the sky doesn't look blue. The sky does look blue. And thinking that the sky is blue doesn't actually cause us any harm. But still, it's a deception, and it's a bit of a false reality. It's a kind of a delusion, if you will. So a common description from the Buddha in regards to this idea of kind of not self versus self is, it's known as the kind of the story of the snake and the monk. So it goes something like this. There was a monk walking kind of at dusk in Thailand and in India. Monks would go out into the villages early in the morning, just as the sun was arising, and walk barefoot and go for alms. And so there's a group of monks walking on a path in Thailand. And a monk, as he's walking, is kind of just looking in front of him, and he sees a snake, and he becomes frightened. And then, what happens when someone feels frightened, but there's constriction, there's some, all of a sudden there's some fear around being bitten by a snake. So upon further reflection, the monk pretty quickly realizes that the snake is not a snake, but that it's actually just a piece of rope. It's a piece of rope kind of strewn along the path. The misunderstanding as the rope that is a snake is the same or similar misunderstanding of the danger as that we might think about, or that we might kind of misunderstand when we think of the idea of not self. because we're so kind of identified with this idea of me and mine, and this is like my body and, my life, and the idea of not, that the idea of not self, or that there is no fixed or permanent self, um, can cause that kind of fear, but it's really not necessary. It's a misunderstanding that there's some kind of danger. And so, I mean, I've asked, it's really scholarly monks. I asked Ajahn Sumedho. I've asked Ajahn Pasano. I might have asked Ajahn Amaro. I went through this period where I would just ask every teacher that I was sitting in front of about some of these things, karma and not self, and because I wanted to hear their answer and their kind of perspective. And actually, I think it might have been Joseph Goldstein. And he said something like, it's really not that big of a deal. People believe it, they don't believe it, they have an understanding of it, but it's not actually that big of a deal. Whether you believe in the idea of a self or not, doesn't actually change that there's no self. It doesn't actually change. Just like the same thing with, like gravity, whether you believe in gravity or not, gravity still exists. Whether you believe in karma or not, karma still is. And so it's really kind of like there's no reason to feel scared about it. Kind of like once we're able to see clearly, okay, that there's no fixed or permanent self, that's really an idea for freedom, not for suffering. But when we see clearly that, in terms of the snake or the monk, when we see clearly that, oh, it's just a rope, we can calm down and not be defended in the same way. In the same way, this can be true about the I. When we realize that there is no I, no fixed, no permanent self, we can relax, be more present in the moment. Well, there's a few common misconceptions. By the way, this is a lot of information, and so if you have questions, you can type them in the chat, kind of as we're going. If there's some particular, or you can raise your hand, and I'll take some time perhaps and break this down. So, common misconceptions: identity view. So we often view this body as a self. So like someone asks something like, how tall are you? Well, I'm 6 foot. So what's 6 foot? Is the body 6 foot? Okay, not thoughts. Thoughts aren't 6 foot. The mind isn't 6 foot. Perception isn't 6 foot. The body is 6 foot. So we might say, what is the I? I am the body. Is that what the I is? Or what color are your eyes? My eyes are brown. So are you the body, or are you separate from the body, or the owner of the body? What mood are you in right now? This leads to the concept of I am emotion: happy, sad, bored. The I is a mind state. So these are all, questions you might ask yourself, questions that many people have asked, questions I have asked. My feelings, my joys, my sadness, again, owner or mind state. The I of the observer. Now, this is something I think has gotten a lot of play over the years. I am the observer. So there is this way in which there's a separation that can take place as we begin to deepen in meditation, where we start to notice the observer, where for maybe most of your life you didn't actually notice the observer. So there is this the observer, the part of the mind that can observe body sensations, the mind itself, thoughts, physical sensations. Aha, the mind is the observer, central, kind of behind the eyes, right? The command center. Although, and this has been studied for some time, neurologists haven't found any kind of one kind of self or even a group of like a part of one particular part of the brain that differentiates self versus not self. So the senses are the self. This is another misconception. So from the Buddhist perspective, they're all wrong. Here's one way that the Buddha described. And I want to also say, I'll read a couple of the Buddha's descriptions of not self, and they can be kind of cryptic and confusing. And this is, I think, why there's a lot of need for clarity, or why people question about this so often. So the Buddha put it this way: in whatever way that they, us, conceive of self, the fact is ever other than that. It is a thought, a fiction. It is useful to have an idea of the self, right? To be separate, but not fixed in some kind of permanent way. My house, it's useful to be able to kind of identify, oh, this is my house versus this is your house. This is my car, this is your car. There is the universal kind of not self, and then there's the relative, like I need to know my zip code, I need to know my social security number, my phone number. I mean, these are the relative, right? What we're talking about here on the larger scale, and I think this is another place people get confused, is this idea of not self, meaning that like we don't exist. Of course we exist. We're here, we exist. Everything that we see exists, but what is it made of? And how is clinging or grasping to that concept a cause of suffering or not? That's really what the Buddha was concerned with. That's what the Buddha considered. So as long as we believe in a solid I, we'll often be afraid of death. Because after all, what is it that dies but the I? So when we look around, we see people, right? We see things. The Buddha saw more than just a person, but the parts of human experience. And he describes it in one, or it's I should say it's described in one way in what's called the Visuddhimagga, in comparison of the way like a butcher sees a cow or a goat, or that they see it not as the whole, but of its parts. So beyond the veil of self, the Buddha used the teaching of the 5 aggregates as a teaching tool of wrong view. This is not just an intellectual investigation. This is a path to peace. It is meant to free our hearts. It is an understanding of how we are put together and break apart all material things. Not just you, not just me, but really all things, which is also kind of leading to the concept of anicca. So I'm just going to pause here before I move into that and just see. Are you saving time? Yes, I'm saving time for the end, towards the end for questions. But if you have a question that pops up, just write it in the chat so that we can come back to it. I know it's a lot. It's a lot of information, right? So that's why I wanted to kind of pause. But this concept of not self, we're going to just continue to work with it. Oops, closed my notes. That's the wrong one. So the key teaching of the Buddha about kind of the wise view, right, is understanding the 5 aggregates. And the aggregates, what that means, the Buddha used the word aggregate to describe human experience, or really all experience. And it was called the khandhas, or in Pali, it's known as khandhas, also known as heap or bundle, or sometimes we call it the piles, the 5 piles, the 5 kinds of stuff that make up human experience. And this is really like the way, like kind of similar to the butcher, right? This is the way that the Buddha kind of saw really all things, but began to kind of see this, what we call a self, this kind of human experience. So I'm going to kind of break down some of them, but really, or actually I'm going to break down all of them, but they're the 5 parts or the 5 kinds of stuff that we, identify or cling to, which really cause suffering. So the first is material form, right? All composite things matter. So one of the ways to describe this is that this is whatever we conceive it as, but right now we're conceiving it as a bowl, or not a hat, although in some cultures it could be a hat. So it could be a container, but we're calling this a bell. And this is a striker. And the striker and the bell come together and create a sound. The striker is material form. The bell is material form. The wavelength or the sound wave is material form. So we're calling all of these things material form. Egg is material form. Sperm, material form. Body is form. Flower is form. Earth is form. Right? All of the composite parts, physical parts of this body form. All other aspects are mental. All other aspects are of khandhas or of the aggregates are basically mental experiences or mind experiences. The second being feeling tone. The feeling tone, or this, some people call it the kind of subtle experience of pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral that can be felt within the body. A subtle but key driving force of craving and aversion. So, a big in our understanding of suffering. Right? Quality of every kind of sense experience as it arises. So another way of thinking about this is I is material form. What is seen is material form. And then there would be a pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral feeling tone about what is seen. Consciousness seeing. And that's what we call feeling tone. So the second kind of level, which just like, let's say kind of I sees object, material form, and then the feeling tone. And somewhere it's a little bit hard to kind of differentiate, but somewhere is what we call perception. And so to see or recognize seeing something, or recognizing, labeling it based on past experience. Sometimes I call this a perceptual database. So based on our past experience, we see something and we recognize it for what we have labeled it or named it in the past, or been told that it is, or have come to some kind of master idea, belief that it is, right? So seeing visually, kind of light, form, color, shape, we interpret what we see based on our past experiences. And there might actually be some feeling tones also based on past experiences as well. And this is kind of moving a little bit more into what we call cultivating emotional balance, when we can begin to kind of break down that process. Okay, so this is some of the aspects of what we call the khandhas. So the Buddha, talked of 4 ways of misperception: that we see permanence where there is impermanence, that we see lasting happiness where there is ultimately unsatisfactoriness, meaning kind of external pleasure seeking, and we see a self where there is not a self, and we see beauty where there is not beauty. So we're they're based on perception. We impute what we call beauty. So basically, in the Buddha's kind of teaching is the idea of, not to rest in labels, That's kind of the theme. And often you'll hear the concept of beginner's mind given that to try to see a thing, or maybe some of you have done like the raisin, the eating the raisin experience or experiment, or like as if you were from another planet, or as if you'd never seen a raisin before and you were kind of curious about it, utilizing beginner's mind. Pretty helpful way to kind of shift. Okay, so back to the khandhas, all right? Mental formations, thoughts, emotions, moods, states of mind, the generation of mind, so what the mind is generating, kind of these subtle qualities. Sometimes, yeah, I mean, mindfulness, mental formation, rapture, concentration, the loving kindness phrases, all kind of mental formation. All the things that go through our mind, all of the thoughts, all of the stories, in basically kind of feeding from the first three, right? Feeding from the material form to the feeling tones, and then perception, and then the mental formation. And then finally, what we call consciousness, right? And what is consciousness? This has there's a few different ways in which people want to, depending on the philosophical understanding, define consciousness. This is kind of the Buddhist perspective, to know the bare quality. So it's to know the bare quality of knowing our experience kind of as it's happening. It is to know at each of the sense doors the experiential noticing, right? Nothing is just happening. The sound and the knowing, kind of like the bell. So there was the bell. And we'll do my little thing again. So, oops, there's the bell and the striker and the sound and the knowing of the sound and the perception of the sound and the feeling tone of the sound. Pleasant, unpleasant, neutral, right? Versus might be too loud, might be unpleasant. So this is all there is, in every moment of every experience. All these things are present. Consciousness, from Ajahn Sumedho, his definition, I've always really liked, consciousness is the reality of here and now. So the reality of kind of material form or sense door contact with, what it's seeing or hearing or sensing or smelling, and then the knowing of that. And then these other things kind of cascade. So why does this matter? Why is it freeing? Why care about this? Because it's all there is. There is no other parts. But don't take my word for it, and don't even believe what the Buddha says. And that's what's beautiful about Buddhism, but investigate for yourself. The I isn't any one thing. The aggregates are born, they last for a while, then they break away, they break apart. This body is born, it lasts for a while, it breaks away. And a couple other examples, and then I'm going to, just like the idea of a car. We call a car, maybe we even gave it a particular label to differentiate it from other cars, but it's all pretty much the same pieces, right? Pretty much the same pieces. And then if you break that car apart, let's say, I don't know, a Lamborghini, okay, we'll call it take a Lamborghini, and you break a Lamborghini apart into all of its parts. Is it still a Lamborghini? The engine is over here, and the tires are over there, and the flashy paint job is over here, and the fuel ejection, and the seats, and the just break it all apart. Is it still a car? So a car is an assembly of its parts, and only if those parts are assembled in a particular way do we call it a car. And so are we. A pen, we call it a pen. But if we were to break it apart into all of its little pieces, and this one doesn't break apart very well, I'd have to really break it. But if we do break it apart, is it still a pen? Or is it something else? We'll open up for questions. I'll actually check to see if there's some questions right now. But I want to read this part of not self. I don't see anything in the chat, so that's okay. All right, so this is from the Samyutta Nikaya. This is the teaching of the Buddha, and this is his definition of not self. The instructed disciple of the noble ones does not regard material shape as self, or self as having material shape, or material shape as being in the self, or the self as being in material shape. Nor does he regard feeling, perception, the impulses, or consciousness in any of these ways. She comprehends each of these aggregates as it really is, that it is impermanent, suffering, not self, compounded, woeful. She does not approach them, grasp after them, or determine self for me, myself. And this, for a long time, conduces to his or her welfare and happiness. Last bit. The instructed disciple of the noble ones, beholds of material shape, feeling, perception, the impulses, or consciousness. This is not mine. This am I not. This is not myself. So that when the material shape, feeling, perception, or impulses, or consciousness change or become otherwise, there arise not from him or her grief, sorrow, suffering, lamentation, and despair. So kind of getting back to what we talked about last week, this kind of idea of nothing whatsoever should be clung to as me or mine. So I want to, what's this one? I want to read this last kind of piece around not self. It's probably my favorite description. This came from Tanasato Bhikkhu. Although we imagine ourselves to be a self, a real, substantial individual, according to the Buddhist teachings, we are in reality nothing more than a flame-like process, an ever-changing combination of matter and mind, neither of which is the same for 2 consecutive moments. All the components of our being are impermanent, unsatisfactory, and devoid of self. There is not a being, an identity, but a becoming, not a product, but a process. I want to read that again. Life is not a being, an identity, but a becoming, not a product, but a process. There is actually no doer, only a doing, no thinker, only a thinking, no goer, only a going. In this sense, the Anatta teaching is not a doctrine of no self, but a not self strategy for shedding suffering by letting go of its cause, leading to the highest undying happiness. At that point, questions of self or no self or not self fall aside. Once there is the experience of such total freedom, where would there be, any concern about what's experiencing or whether or not it is a self? So with that, there's a hand raised. So go ahead. I'll lower your hand. Severine.
Hey, this is Mike.
Hey, Mike.
I share the account with
Yeah,
Sever.
no worries. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. I think I could like talk about this for days with you or someone, because there's so much to ponder and unpack. But I'll try to keep it more limited. I often look at things through an anthropological perspective. I studied anthropology. I really enjoyed it, and I like to kind of try to understand humans as animals as much as any other animal on the planet. And so when we talk about the idea of self and not self, I'm getting the part, and I feel the part about how much we're taught and how much we are indoctrinated, if you will, into the idea of individualism, and I am a person with feelings and thoughts of my own, and they are important, and that phenomenon I understand in what you're talking about as like very separate and not real, so to speak. But at the same time, I'm kind of thinking, okay, but we as humans, we as creatures have instinct, and part of instinct involves self-preservation, involves not hurting yourself, not avoiding death, like just staying alive, eating food, having sex, sleeping, like doing things that keep us alive. And so that's where I kind of wonder, I don't even know if I have a real question so much as like to bounce it off you to get your thoughts of like, well, does the idea of instinct, which isn't taught or indoctrinated or anything else, it's who we are as creatures,
Sure.
How does that jibe, if at all, with this notion that like, oh, we are not a self, I am not any one thing, I am just an amalgamation of parts that happens to have a beating heart and so forth. Like how do those go in line? Because if you kind of go with the not self angle and zoom out enough, then like we wouldn't even care to continue existing, because I'm just zillions of atoms together, and what difference does it make?
Mm-hmm.
Something like that.
Okay, well, that was kind of two different points slash arguments. Oh, it wasn't, the first one wasn't really an argument. It actually wasn't. Well, it was an agreement, because the whole, yeah. Do you think a fox, one, knows it's a fox, thinks it's a fox, cares whether it's a fox or not? Not at all. Doesn't have an identity of self. Dogs don't have identities of self, yet they're emotional, they have parts, they're experiencing life, but they're not identified with what's happening in their experience. Almost, we're the only kind of animal that does that. Maybe chimpanzees to some degree, maybe gorillas to another degree, perhaps. I don't really know. I'm not that schooled in that rhythm. But so that kind of, yeah, that we're all just that so much of the indoctrination is I am separate from you, and therefore I'm either better than, less than, or equal to you, and then or my thoughts are better than your thoughts, or I have different thoughts and emotions than you have. And so this is where we get all tied up. And what the Buddha is talking about is all that shit causes suffering.
Mm-hmm.
And how do we let go of suffering? Doesn't mean we're going to not have pain, but how do we let go of suffering? By stopping over identifying with me and mine, and kind of the zooming it out. Yeah, I mean, I don't know what Neanderthals kind of thought, but we definitely evolved from this instinctual behavior, which is part of adaptation, and having these kind of overdeveloped kind of third layer of brain is what gave us both the ability to wake up, to become free from suffering, but also causes the suffering itself. So it's like both the problem and the solution lie with the mind, and lie with our ability to, from the Buddhist perspective, to awaken.
So can we still believe that we have and should have and abide by instincts?
Well, it's funny because what is really our instinctual nature, but to seek pleasure and avoid pain,
Mm-hmm.
which is the basis of what causes our suffering. Overly seeking pleasure and avoiding pain, although keeping us kind of existing, is also a huge cause. So this is the dukkha, anicca, anatta, right? So suffering exists. Everything that arises passes away, and then that there is no fixed and permanent me or you or us. That it's all in flux, it's all changing. So the instinct, although this is where the suffering isn't our fault. It's not your fault that you seek pleasure and avoid pain. Of course not. That's instinctual. And every living being, in my view and my limited understanding of both cultural and physical anthropology, is every living being does the same thing, because that is part of an ant, a cell, a single, amoeba will avoid an electric shock, right? And so that is instinctual kind of, I don't know, something about the planet, something about this, it's beyond my understanding. Maybe kind of quantum physics has a better explanation than I do. But from the Buddhist perspective, which is all I'm really representing here, is that the clinging to self, the clinging to certain instincts will cause suffering.
Right.
And whether we want to let that go and transform that in some way, it's up to each of us to figure that part out for ourselves.
So this is maybe either a funny question or like a stupid question, but just for the sake of it, if I'm standing in the road and a car is driving my way, if I jump out of the way, am I a bad Buddhist?
Yeah. No, I think there's nothing wrong with self-preservation, especially if you're not fully enlightened. I think what you're talking about is instinct, right? That, of course, like that is the staying alive instinct. But if you got hit and you died, would that make you what? A bad, I don't know, a good Buddhist, bad Buddhist. I think the whole good, bad Buddhist, I liked what you were saying about the getting up until getting hit by the truck, whether that makes you a good, bad Buddhist. I think it makes you, maybe kind of dumb. Like,
right.
why would you, why would someone just, especially if they're not fully, if they haven't reached the goal from the Buddhist perspective. And what's the goal? To liberate our lives, to liberate ourselves, to liberate our minds and hearts from suffering.
Right.
There's people who their thought is, I'm going to liberate my heart and mind by not existing anymore, and they step in front of the truck.
Right.
And that's actually, from the Buddhist perspective, what would happen is that they would still be in the struggle of samsara. There still would be karmic implications that they have to work through. And that's a whole nother kind of thought or discussion. But anyway, I want to kind of give Mike a little. We only got like a minute, Mike.
Me or someone else?
Oh, I'm sorry, the other Mike. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I was reading a couple weeks ago the Middleman Discourses of the Buddha, and he goes on a long. I think I mentioned this to you before. It goes on a long thing about elements not belonging to us, and we don't understand it. And this ties into like how we make things so personal and we get so possessive. And I kind of had like an insight when you were going on about anatta, and it made that long dissertation of things the Buddha fired off in the Middleman Discourses make sense to me, because the more we abide independent, it seems to me, and the more we let go of everything, we can transcend the suffering that the instincts that are embedded within the mind cause. And that's my interpretation, my limited interpretation so far that I have, only been involved in this in a year, is that the more that I let go of things like I, me, my making, and the more that I realize that like this materiality, this mind, it's not mine, it's of the universe. It belongs to the universe. The elements belong to the universe. Like it, anytime like possession or comes into the frame, trying to say I own this body, I own this awareness, I own this consciousness, like I have the soul, that water's mine, this house is mine, that car is mine. It's none of it's mine.
It makes
all impermanent.
Yeah, it makes us heavy. One of the ways that it's described is the more that we create layers of self or identity, the heavier we get. And the heavier we get, the more bound to this earthly plane we are. And so what you're kind of saying is like, yeah, we all have a mind, we all have feelings, we all have thoughts. They come, they go, they're moving through us, they're moving around us. So this gets into this kind of bigger, broader, like there is way more from the Buddhist perspective, from the quantum physics perspective, from every kind of, even probably from beyond the anthropological perspective, there is way more going on here than can be seen. And that being able to see the material form and then experience the other, four khandhas, the other four senses, or not senses, but, the feeling tone, the perception, the consciousness, all of these things, being able to experience that is what can help free us from the confines of the heaviness of this body and or the suffering.
And that goes back to clinging and craving too. It's the root of all suffering. Like clinging or craving or holding on to anything at all is going to cause suffering. And then letting go, like Ajahn Chah said, do you want mindfulness? Do you want the Dharma? Let go. Let go of everything.
Right.
And just,
easier said than done, right?
No, obviously.
It is, talking
about anatta, that
right.
it ties into impermanence. It ties into like no ownership, or like it's we're of and from the universe. Like it doesn't belong to us. This doesn't belong to us.
True.
I think Yoda gave me my first Dharma lessons.
Super
like, luminous beings. This isn't. Shout out to Yoda.
Yoda was hardcore. Yoda was totally a Buddhist disciple, no doubt. Listen, we got to end. We're at the time. It's like, shout out to Yoda. There is actually a great book called The Dharma of Star Wars. That's super fun. It's interesting and fun, and how Star Wars, all of the Star Wars have deep philosophical kind of Buddhist and Taoist perspectives. We can get into that sometimes. It's kind of a way good nerd out. All right, all of the goodness of our practice, settle into this heart mind. May any benefit that we've gained from this practice today, may this benefit be dedicated to the freedom from suffering for all beings. May all beings be happy. May all beings be free from suffering. There is a donation link that got put up by Michael. Thank you, Michael. And if you feel like clicking on that and donating, or even going to Venmo, you can donate to Against the Stream on Venmo. There's a donation link in our website. Check us out, support us. We can't do it without you. We need each other. All right, take care, y'all.